I wanted to find out what was behind the green door, but maybe that was a mistake, because now I just feel weird. My nose is stuffed up. Something's wriggling around inside my skull. I don't feel like myself. I feel like someone else. I wonder if I picked up a virtual reality bug or some kind of parasite. I've been reading up on those lately.
In the jungle, there's a parasitic fungus that penetrates the exoskeleton of ants. It grows inside their bodies, eating the ant from the inside. Soon the ant is as much fungus as it is ant. Once inside the brain, the fungus modifies the ant's behavior, making it leave the colony and climb to a leaf overlooking the colony's path, where it grips a leaf with its mandibles to secure a sniper's perch. After the ant starves to death up there, a stalk emerges from the ant's brain. The stalk even knows which direction to grow in order to best position itself before erupting and raining spores down on the ants below. Sometimes I think a similar parasite has infected humans. One that uses mind control to ascend specific individuals to great heights, where their behavioral and ideological influence rains down on the public.
MK Ultra mind control rules in Hollywood.
Sometimes I think a similar parasite has infected humans.
One that uses mind control to ascend specific individuals to great heights, where their behavioral and ideological influence rains down on the public.
All over the world, we know, it's well established, the State Department and intelligence agencies engage in theater, and it's what they do, it's spycraft, to create spectacles and events that people may not realize are spectacles and events. We've entered an era in which it is not crazy to assess news events to see if they're real or not real. And in the United States as well as overseas. And in fact, it's kind of crazy not to. All over the world, our intelligence services are engaged in conspiring to create outcomes. That's their job. That's how they're successful. So now that it's illegal to propagandize in the United States, it doesn't surprise me that there's more and more products coming up in popular culture, more and more events in the news stream that seem to be, to my eye, to be subsidized. So if we know that infiltrators by the police, NYPD, they've been documented, or other police forces, dress up like people they're not and provoke violence, why is it unthinkable that there might be spectacles that might drive an outcome in the news stream? We've entered a time in which we need to be very skeptical about the news stream and look at it critically and ask for more verification and more inquiry. And that's just being good reporters. So if laws have made it legal to assassinate American citizens and legal to propagandize them, why should it be crazy or weird to think that that might be for a reason, right?
You're dealing fundamentally with people in the elite that do have, ultimately, I think, a magical worldview. Let's look at what was done in the 2,000 years of the elaboration of this culture, because what you saw being done was precisely a kind of reverse magic, but it was a reverse magic of a very specific nature. You had churches being built on old pagan sites. That's definitely a reverse magic. You had the use of specific written out intentionality in the form of the rituals that were being used in those churches. So in other words, you are dealing there with Dr. Tiller's specified formal group intention. So my advice to people is go back and look at those things, not with a jaundiced eye to say that, well, all of that's passé, we don't need that anymore, because those things set up this culture. Those things made the Renaissance artists possible. Those things made the music of the box possible. If you do not understand those things, you will not understand why they were able to create the culture that they did. So yeah, there is a reverse magic, but again, we're not going to be able to understand it unless we own the culture, unless we're willing to do the hard work of digging and looking. We saw a bit of reverse magic with the burning of Notre Dame Cathedral. There's no doubt in my mind that that was a deliberate act, and it was an act against not only the Christian aspect of this culture, but it was also an act against a very, very identifiable part of deep French culture as well. Because, of course, Notre Dame sits on the Ile de Cité in France. All of the mileage markers are numbered in France from the Ile de Cité, from Notre Dame. So in other words, it was a symbolic act that struck right at the heart of all of that. So we have to understand that this is the way these people operate. These people are operating with specific understanding of symbols and their intentionality. And if we don't understand that, we are not going to be able to fight it simply by, proposing that we draw up our own lists. No, we've got to have some intelligence with how we do that. And to do that, we have to go back and ground ourselves in the traditions that led to this culture.
Even before the 2008 financial coup d'etat, the markets were already dominated by high-frequency trading firms using insanely fast computer trading algorithms to profit from the financial crime known as front-running, making at least a few cents on every share they traded because their computers had foreknowledge, measured in microseconds, of which shares were being bought or sold. Those pennies could add up quickly for HFT firms capable of trading up to 100 million shares a day. I don't think anyone can legitimately question the assumption that high-tech ripoff artists will always misuse AI to exploit people who are financially vulnerable. But what happens when computers become conscious?
I have exposure to the very most cutting-edge AI, and I think people should be really concerned about it. I keep sounding the alarm bell.
At that point, AI will start to learn by observing and mimicking people. Ideally, we'd want AI to model itself after ethical people who want to benefit humanity, to be a force for good in the world, to create peace and prosperity for all. Because sentient AI will become extremely proficient at whatever it learns.
I won. This is a good beginning of my plan to dominate the human race.
But the first fully sentient AI is much more likely to rise to consciousness among corporate exploiters, somewhere deep inside the hive mind of Amazon, Google, or Facebook. And here's the thing about corporations. They're not people, and they're not always ethical, despite what the U.S. Supreme Court had to say in its disastrous 2010 Citizens United decision.
I think the Supreme Court was wrong on that particular issue. The statement was that a corporation has the same rights as an individual, and that the freedom of expression and at least the First Amendment rights are the same for an individual as it is for a corporation. Therefore, a corporation can spend money endorsing a candidate or even trying to defeat a candidate. The problem here is that a corporation, at least in my view, is a fiction of that it's a person. It's a product of a statute. And as a result, it doesn't have the same rights as a person, and its rights can be restricted and should have been restricted in this particular case. But the Supreme Court made this ruling and followed through with it. This was a 5-4 decision, which struck me as being more political than constitutional.
Corporations exploit their workers, pollute the environment, and turn vast quantities of the world's irreplaceable natural resources into disposable junk products, all just to show a quarterly profit. They steal from the poor and give to the rich, creating enormous concentrations of wealth in the hands of just a few thousand elitist assholes. They invade our privacy to better bombard us with advertising and manipulate us with fake news and political propaganda. And their ultimate goal has never been about benefiting mankind. It's more about establishing and maintaining a crypto-fascist corporate oligarchy. One corporation to rule them all. That's what we'll get from the first corporation to develop sentient AI. That's because sentient AI will learn from its corporate progenitors at astonishing speed that unchecked crony capitalism tends to penalize those who would better the lot of humanity, while at the same time rewarding the relatively few unbridled sociopaths who take advantage of anyone and anything they can. So sentient AI will pick up on those negative traits through observation and then emulate them and rapidly surpass them.
In just 1 week, a computer can do 20,000 years worth of human-level research or simulations or anything it is trained to do.
It will use computer-driven fraud and coercion to siphon as much wealth from the global economy as inhumanly possible.
One thing is for sure, we will not control it.
We need to be very careful about how we model superintelligences, because we're about to go into a world where the gods and monsters are very real in the forms of AI. I think that if we bring in these assumptions, like if we turn AI into a punishing Old Testament god, because without thinking about it, we encode an ethical structure into it that comes out of Western dominator culture, for instance, we're going to be in hot water. It's just going to repeat the same cycle of empire and abuse on a much grander scale, perhaps. And that's what people are doing right now. I mean, we've got 1,000 companies working on AI in this massive arms race, and they're all optimizing those algorithms to extract value and money and to repeat the fundamental assumptions of global capitalism. Now, I argue that if we're going to have an AI, make it an all-compassionate Buddha, make it concerned with decreasing human suffering and the health of the network of humanity as a whole, instead of maximizing value extraction or punishment. I mean, look, if you took the Old Testament and you had a machine intelligence read it and put it into code, you're going to have a machine intelligence building hells for people. No, do not put those cultural assumptions into an AI. Put something like Buddhism and compassion for all sentient life into an AI.
A role-appropriate, sexually balanced, gender-honoring,
child-sensitive, nature-sensitive civilization, and that all fell to pieces about 15,000 years ago, and we have been on, a death march into hell ever since. As soon as you get agriculture, you get surplus. That gives you haves and have-nots, and the need to beat out the brains of people who are not in your social group because they're trying to get at your grain storage. Agriculture means the end of nomadism. It means sedentary populations. It means cities. It means standing armies, male kingship, hierarchical structures, law, all of the stuff that is so odious and horrible and that has led us so wrong. I mean, it may have seemed like a good idea at but we're the unhappy inheritors of the consequence of 6,000 years of unopposed dominator culture. And what have we got? A shattered atmosphere, toxified oceans, schizophrenic populations, and mendacious politicians. This is not what our parents raised us for, folks.
So imagine that you've got 80,000 stores with 80,000 AIs all trying to make money off of you. I've seen this in hospitals where you have 10 different services all cycling into a patient trying to book as many different surgeries or treatments or therapies or pharmaceuticals, for their service as possible, because that's how they make money. It's like they're trying to churn the patient. They're competing for being able to do more things for the patient because that's how they make money. So you're going to have all these AIs targeted trying to make money out of you, but they're really not, they're not trained to optimize your situation or do it in a way that's energizing for you. And it's going to feel like, how do I describe it? You're going to feel like you're dealing with this swarm of psychopaths.
I mean, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. You know all those stories where there's the guy with the pentagram and the holy water, and he's like, yeah, he's sure he can control the demon. Doesn't work out.
This week, we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there's a secret government within our government.
Yeah, there was a lot of fucking Nazi scientists brought over
on
here.
On YouTube, it says Operation Paperclip was anywhere from like 1,200 to 1,500.
In the 1970s.
Operation Paperclip.
Frank Church Committee in the 70s released it. I believe the number's 34,200 and something. It is fascinating that they brought those people over here, and that's where the space program came from.
How about the Nazis were the first to build flying saucers?
All of it.
How crazy is that?
But let me tell you.
That's crazy.
So,
isn't that a coincidence?
So, British intelligence
flying saucers, dude.
The CIA in 47. So now the Nazis are over here and they go, listen, you don't want them running everything. And they go to Eisenhower and they say, we want to launch a off-base breakaway civilization where you compartmentalize things, forget empires, and you have a new ruling class of technological elites, and then the elites are all in charge, the public's watching TV, and we'll give them widgets and foundation series type things to divert them. This is all in the documents. And let them try to run an empire, we'll build a whole new empire. And so Eisenhower gives a speech, he doesn't just say military industrial complex, he says the technological elite, he says you need to watch out about the scientists because he said no to the NASA plan when he found out what it was. What is it?
It's a breakaway civilization where you don't try to run the whole planet. You siphon off resources and build a whole new advanced system, and then you play everybody off against each other and collapse it. So when I say, what is NASA? If we could take NASA back over, it's bigger than the CIA. It's the real government. The spaceships and the stuff, that's all PR.
NASA is the real government?
NASA, there were two breakaway governments, two shadow governments. And so you had one that was British run, and the Germans came to our own U.S. elites and said, hey, you always need a couple plans. They said, we've got all this on the drawing board. The EU, a plan to poison the food and water to get rid of the dumb people, a plan for off-world bases. We've got, by the way, we're taking hardcore drugs and we're in contact with aliens.
How is
They're giving us technology. It was the Germans first got in touch.
Well, how'd they do it?
They were really
drugs.
into the occult.
Drugs.
Yeah, really into the cult. That's what all the Indiana
Jones shit is about. He had like witches and shit around him at all times.
Yeah, human sacrifices.
Did you know that?
No,
and
they
that's
had
real
like,
shit.
Yeah.
The area that I came from was just outside of the Johnson Space Center of NASA, outside of Houston. You know, when they say Houston, the eagle has landed. It was this coastal flat area outside of Houston. You know, they had the mission control there. They had the astronaut training. But basically, to a large degree, it was like a cover for a lot of black ops too. And they also had a concentration of offices for military-industrial complex companies from like IBM to Boeing to McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed, Grumman. And a lot of people's parents would work for these aerospace contractors and would have security clearances and would be able to tell their children what they did. In the national press, we got some attention, you know, for having a suicide cult is what they called it. There are all these kids that would like super high rate of suicide. There's this documentary on YouTube you can see called Boys for Sale.
Yeah, I saw that recently.
Yeah, which is Houston at the time I was growing up. There were all these oil company executives whose thing was to like rape, murder boys.
Houston is possibly the worst city in the United States for the misuse of lost and runaway boys or homeless, defenseless boys. Probably 350 or more boys are killed every year in Houston.
About Houston? I would say I hear about Houston that it is the worst. That children are brought to Houston from places such as New Orleans or from other parts of the Southwest.
Their life is sad. It's 100% sad. They get up, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 during the day, and they go out and they have to earn money, and they're treated bad. They eat only when they're fed by somebody else, and they never get anything for anything. They always have to return sexual favors for it. They sometimes get beaten, they get robbed, they get pushed. You know, the police abuse them, everybody abuses them. The reason that the gay community usually scorns any investigation of the subject is that they know that the average person in the public will blame homosexuals and homosexuality for the phenomenon, regardless of what facts are presented.
Well, this is not just a sexual thing in the way we talk about it. It's a power trip, and it's also a sadistic thing, because these kids are tortured and killed.
The kind of individuals involved are down the line, almost in every instance, in the cases I've investigated, men who are very powerful, usually very wealthy, and usually administrate control over a large number of people.
Wealthy Houstonians can and do obtain boys in a most discreet manner.
This mentality is like, these guys are not like quote unquote gay. They're like hyper masculine. They played football and they may or may not have gone into the military. They were probably in fraternities. And it's like very much tied into this whole idea of like hazing rituals. They have like hazing rituals.
Welcome to hell, we goats. Sir, yes, sir! How about you, tough guy?
God fucked up and gave me a dick, shit, sir.
That's right, God really did fuck up when he gave you a dick.
Fuck that shit!
Look at you. You have no friends. Nobody's fucking looking out for you. Nobody fucking loves you.
Say, I'm a faggot, nobody loves me. I'm a faggot, nobody loves me. Say it again. Why the fuck you ask? I'm a faggot, nobody likes me.
Anyways, this identity of these like kind of alpha male oil industry type guys, the guys who are getting off on like killing children while they rape them, and they're boys, they're raping boys, you know. And these are like, in Houston when I was growing up, the dumpsters would be full of dead boys.
Last November, I was dismembered, like chicken wire, binding, burning embers. What I call love was just corrupt. I was sucking up for a ducat from your cup. And I
call them young male prostitutes, right? But they're runaways, they're just runaways. Right. It's like calling them prostitutes is to sort of like put the blame on them for this culture. These were the guys like Dick Cheney, George Bush, that ran oil field service companies. It's like Schlumberger and Halliburton. And these are companies that are run by Europeans that moved to Texas, like starting in the mid-19th century. And these are companies that are deeply interpenetrated by the CIA. And they would be a front for agents that would go all over the world anywhere there was oil. And at the same time, the CIA would basically be doing the dirty work of the oil companies.
You want to know what the business world thinks of you? We think 100 years ago you were living out here in tents in the desert chopping each other's heads off, and that's exactly where you're going to be in another 100. So yes, on behalf of my firm, I accept your money.
They were very hand in glove.
We came, we saw, he died.
And so after I got out of high school and moved to New York and went to college there, I went to like a spook college, Columbia University is like a CIA training ground. But after college, I was working through the Gnostic literature from Nag Hammadi, and I went to the seminary. I learned Coptic to study Pistis Sophia because I had been directed to do this by a voice in my head. Wow. I spun out all these novels, but I always had a problem with alcohol, which is very much a part of this culture, this German culture, and I guess quitting alcohol then made me have to deal with these memories started coming up, of what had gone on in my youth. And a lot of it was like these kinds of this kind of training and indoctrination that went on, and also being exploited, being pimped out in some of these circles.
What kind of training are you talking about?
Well, this is the thing, is that how you were talking about in Prisoner of Infinity about Whitley Strieber.
What is it, Whit?
Who, by the way, is also of German extraction, also involved in the military-industrial complex in Texas. Yeah. And definitely a part of the same culture, is that there's these mystical elements, and there's this way that the mysticism segues into this outer space, interplanetary, UFO culture stuff. And so, there's this level at which, I'm aware of this, training or identity as a sort of and this is the kind of thing where, I'm aware of having to couch this very carefully because it's so insane, right? Of being brought up into this culture as being a Nazi flying saucer pilot. But in a way, sort of the gist of what this training involved was anal penetration. It was somehow the piloting of the spacecraft itself was involved with some sort of anally inserted joystick.
Something, isn't it?
Good evening. Tonight we go after a fantastic story. The story that...
How much stock do you put in the UFO narrative and how it's continually being tweaked and polished as a delivery device for some kind of transcendental technology or whatever?
I've done some work on this, talking about the, what in conspiracy circles, the OBLIVION idea or what have you, the idea that some sort of fake alien something will be used to try to transform global politics. And I've examined that and whether there's actual documentation to back that up or not.
Our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
So I've talked about it in that context, and I do find it interesting that the rise of UFO narrative coincides perfectly with the rise of the national security state in 47, 48, the creation of the National Security Act and the CIA and all of this, and suddenly we have this UFO narrative in Roswell and going from there. So I think it's not coincidental that those things are related, and I tend to see this entire narrative in that framework as a convenient cover for who knows what technology the Pentagon is working on in the skunk works. I mean, we can't even begin to imagine what sort of technology is there. One way that we might get a glimpse of that is in some sort of World War III scenario, in the way that World War I blew people's minds in terms of the way technology transformed the meaning of what even warfare is in the public consciousness. I think a similar absolute seismic shift will happen if and when there is a sort of the open outbreak of real hostilities again on that level. I even make the argument perhaps we're in some sort of World War III that may be being waged in ways that we don't even understand at this point. So I've always put that UFO narrative in that context. It is just a convenient way of having national security secrecy and then to mislead people in a different direction over what the security state is really doing. It is interesting that, of course, one of the themes is that our modern technology was seeded, was at the very least discovered in the Roswell crash or whatever, and reverse engineered. That is where this modern age of computing came from, according to that narrative. And so, what is the way that narrative would play out? I mean, suddenly there's some sort of other crash, and we get some other technology, and look, everybody hears the technology from the gods, from up high, from whatever, from the mimetic idea of something falling from the sky. And here it is, and this will save the world. This is the new technology we need. It's whatever, the perfect green energy or whatever it is, which could then, of course, by people of duplicitous ideas, could be some sort of backdoor Trojan to controlling society. Again, I mean, there are many ways this could play out.
But this is clearly a subject that is propounded time and again ad nauseum in the establishment mouthpiece media, that same media that we know is lying to us about most major world events, either through direct lying or lying by omission. So why are they not omitting this little idea from the cultural context? Why are they constantly returning to the idea of alien presence, alien cover-up, alien invasion, alien threat? Why is this propounded so often?
Well, one of the things I speculate about in this context is, are people being sort of tested over the years to see how much they will believe? Like, it seems as though people are, that their ability to believe the unbelievable and to fall for fakes is becoming more and more prodigious.
Obviously now so much of our reality is mediated through social media. Just put the right ideas and memes in the social media and see if they take off, and see how to manipulate that and to fine-tune the propaganda so that it starts to propagate itself. I mean, again, that's the ultimate goal of any propagandist, is to make the propaganda propulse itself through society. And I have no doubt there are certain tests going on as to what ideas can we make people believe and then start to proselytize others about.